Chuck, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. This is fun.
Sure, Laura. This is a good time.
We really wanted to introduce you in a different way to the community. You know a lot of people in Florida tennis.
Okay.
There might be a few out there, like maybe 4 or 5 that don't
Fair enough.
know you.
Fair enough.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in tennis initially?
Geez, how did I get involved in tennis initially? I think not unlike a lot of people, I started playing tennis with my father. And I started playing with my parents. My father and my mother played Alta. They were league players, but even before that, my dad used to let me tag along. I'd play baseball at what was the old Bird Park in Richmond, Virginia, and I'd be playing baseball, and then he'd be on the tennis courts, and then afterwards he'd drag me out there, and I'd indulge him, and I'd go out and play a little tennis with him.
That's, you know, there's a couple things we have in common that are kind of fun, and one is I was a softball player growing up.
Right.
And my mom used to make me play tennis with her. She loves tennis, and I would hit the ball consistently over the fence every single time. But it was the most fun for me because it was the one activity my mom and I could do together when I was young.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of that way with me and my father, and I was very close to my parents, and so it was one of the things that we would actually enjoy getting to do together. So it's good.
Yeah, it's a great way to get involved in tennis. When did you first get involved with USTA Florida, and what is it about this section? There's a certain magic to the section. Of course, I'm biased, but I think there is. And what is that magic to you? What makes this section so special? I'm
biased, too. We're both biased towards the Florida section, but I guess I started getting involved because at one point I was a volunteer for the USPTA and involved in the Teaching Pro Association. And then the more I got involved in that, I started to figure out that there are a lot of synergies there, and there's a lot of crossovers, because when one succeeds, we both succeed, if that makes any sense. And so I began to notice that tennis pros are better served when they're really focused on growing tennis, whether it's at their club or their municipality or wherever. When they're focused on growing tennis and having a bigger base of people that actually want to take lessons, then their business grows. And I thought, what better way to get involved with really growing tennis and to get more involved with the USTA, especially the Florida section, because at one point we used to operate, I believe it's fair to say we operated in these silos where, you know, one group was focused on growing tennis and the other was focused on kind of growing tennis, but more involved with their business of giving lessons. And then I think actually Bob Fender was one of the first people. Bob Fender was one of the first people that really said we've got to get these two groups together, because we have people that are both section volunteers that are teaching pros, and we have teaching pros that are section volunteers. So the more we get the group somewhat integrated, and I think you can remember one of the first sweatshirts or jackets we had of the two groups growing tennis together, I think that was a really good thing. And then as I got more and more involved in the section, you know, I guess what the phrase you used, when does the magic happen? That's kind of when the magic happens, because then I started to meet all of these incredible, I used to jokingly say, they're just such do-gooders, you know? They're doing things for all the right reasons, and they seem to be showing up at parks, and anywhere there's tennis being introduced, they would just invariably, our volunteers would show up and promote. And so I think the magic started to happen when I really started to understand that we're all kind of in the same boat, right? We're all trying to grow tennis together. And while some of us do it as a passion, as volunteers, and others do it as a profession, at the end of the day, we're all kind of doing the same thing. And the more we can get ourselves linked and aligned on how to do it, I think everybody wins.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I recently had the opportunity to sit down with your new board members and talk to them. And one of the things I asked them was, what made you apply for the USTA Florida board? Every single one of them said the mission and being able to serve more people. Not a single one said to grow my business or to make more money. So kind of going back to what you said, that there really is a special commitment and service in this section that we never seem to have a hard time finding people who really believe in the mission and want to grow the game.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the quality of people they are, that they're kind of big picture people, and they understand that, you know, if you're in a town, the more people that play, the better your business is going to be. whether they're playing at a private club or a public facility or playing at a Parks and Rec or a Boys and Girls Club. The bigger the base of introductory players and new players we get, everybody benefits. Now, you might not benefit immediately, but we all know that at some point that tide, that rising tide that lifts all boats, that's that groundswell that really makes tennis grow.
I think you can see that. You know, we've said since I think it's 2018, we've added 500,000 players in our state. That's playing like that long game, right? And saying, hey, you're going to year over year keep growing the game. And I think you, the board members, our people get that.
I think so. I think the board and our past board and people get that the more we get people playing, I mean, I've said this a gazillion times, you grow tennis a couple of ways and neither one is very complicated. You get more people playing. You get new people on the court that experience tennis and like it and become new players. And then you take that existing group of players, current players, and you find opportunities for them to play more, whether it's an additional league or additional clinic or whether it's just a drop-in doubles. Anything that gets people playing more tennis really grows tennis. Play occasions, I guess you'd call it.
So I'm going to ask you a fun question. I was at a meeting recently in Southwest Section, and they had a shirt that said, "In my tennis era," which I thought was pretty fun. And so I wanted to ask you, when you think, you've been around a long time, when you think about the current era that Florida tennis is in, how would you define that?
You know, I thought about this a little bit, and I would have to say change is probably the one word that would come to mind, because this era is unlike any other era that we've had in the tennis industry. And I think if you look at the tennis industry as a very, very big, broad picture, and I say change for a number of reasons, primarily because there's never been a bigger opportunity for tennis to grow. We came out of COVID. Everybody wanted to do a sport that was outdoors, and sometimes I'll use the term tennis is physically distant but socially close. You know, you can get out and play with people and still socialize with them, but during the pandemic, it was far enough apart where you weren't indoors like in a gym exercising. So I think the reason I use the word change is the whole dynamic of the sport is starting to change a little bit. You have great opportunities to play, but at the same time, you have incredible challenges. And the biggest challenge to me is that there's never been more competition in the racket sports industry than there is now. Now, you can view it as one of two ways. You can view the competition as a negative, like, oh my gosh, you know, other racket sports are taking away our space and our courts, which is absolutely true. But I've never thought that competition was a bad thing. I actually think that competition forces you to do one of two things. You either cower and lose, or you find a way to be creative and get better. And I think the opportunity that tennis has now is to look at itself a little bit differently, know that we're not the only racket sport in town, and how do we make our sport easier to learn? How do we make people understand that physically it's a terrific way to get out, get fit, have fun, make friends, not unlike any other racket sports, which, by the way, a lot of them do it very, very well. They do a great job with casual play. And what we've got to do is maybe look at ourselves and think, you know, and again, I'm just, you know, in a broad picture, we've probably focused on the top of the pyramid in competitive tennis for way too long. And maybe it's time to look at how do we fill that bottom of the pyramid with getting good, frequent players that maybe don't aspire to be top player in the world, but they just want to get out and exercise and play. So I think, you know, when I use that word change, I think our whole landscape is changing. And I think we're either going to adapt with it, which is what we're going to learn from our weekend. We're either going to adapt to the change and actually thrive in the change, or we're not going to be as successful as we could.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to phrase it. And when we look at change, right? Sometimes we think about the sport itself and the format of play, and we miss some of the other lessons that the other racket sports have taught us. The growth of racquetball, in the 80s, right? That was a big marketing and advocacy push that really promoted that, and you ended up with racquetball rooms in every public park in the state of Florida. A lot of them aren't used now, right? And you're seeing a very similar thing unfold with pickle, and now you're seeing padel come into that space. So I think having that broad strategic vision to say, what are the other lessons we're learning here? Like, yes, people want social casual play, but there's another component here that maybe we have kind of been quiet on for too long.
Right. Well, I'm glad now that I'm in the kind of the public sector at a public tennis center, and I get the opportunity to really see a lot of it firsthand as far as the strategy of. And yesterday we opened 6 new pickleball courts, as you know, down at the Village of Wellington. And I was, at least I think, a good advocate for the fact that they need their own space. They don't want blended lines. They want their own courts. They want their own product. And tennis players, in turn, equally want their own product. And they want their clay courts, and they want their hard courts. And they don't necessarily like blended lines. Nothing against blended lines. The world doesn't come to an end when you use them. But I think if everybody had a preference, I think there's enough activity, and I think there's enough demand for both that they can certainly have their own space. And, we're pretty blessed that the people, the councils and the various leaders in Wellington had enough foresight to buy the land and have property that we could do it. But I think it's a pretty good model that, everything can grow in its own way, and one doesn't have to grow at the expense of another always. And I think sometimes that message doesn't get out there. That said, as we've talked before, our infrastructure is really going to be important, because in order to grow the game, we need more tennis courts. We need more spaces and people to play. Private clubs need them. Public tennis centers and public parks certainly need them. But we need it's like the chicken or the egg, which came first. We need the place to play, and we need the programs to fill the courts.
Yep. Very, very well said.
Thanks.
I knew you'd be a great guest.
Great. I knew you'd be a great host, so let's just keep rolling.
So that gets me to a really important question. We've talked about some of the lessons we've learned and what the landscape is like. What's the main thing that we need to do more or differently as an organization to really fulfill our mission for that long term in the future?
I think we can go back to we've got to expand our net of who would be the next tennis player. What type of person would become a lifelong player? And I think we've done great things so far reaching out to adaptive communities. I think we've done a great job with that. I think we need to continue that. I think we need to really look back at what constitutes good social play, good casual play. Because if pickleball taught us one thing, it is that people don't have a lot of spare time. They like a product where they can learn to play easily. The pathway to play has got to get quicker and simpler. And for the longest time, I think people really thought that in order to be a frequent tennis player, you had to take a half a year to a year of lessons before you'd get out there. I mean, golf is a great example, because in the sport of golf, they don't want people on the golf course that can't play golf.
Because you slow it down.
You slow it down for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why, somebody was, actually I was at a conference years ago, and I was on a panel with someone from golf, and they used the analogy of, if you go to a ski slope and you're a family of 4 and you want to learn to ski, within seconds they've got beginner graduated equipment for the kids to use. If you're an adult, if you're the husband and you ski and the wife doesn't, they've got the wife on a beginner slope, they've got the kids on the little kiddie slopes, and they're all skiing, and they get together for lunch, and then they have an afternoon socially trying to ski together. And the golf representative used the analogy of, if a family of 4 walked into a golf shop and said, hey, we all want to learn to play golf. We watched it on TV and we thought it'd be fun. You know, they look at them like they have three heads.
Right.
They go, well, there's this little section of the driving range where the kids can make some noise because we really don't want them mainstream on the driving range, let alone on the golf course. I think tennis can be a little bit guilty of that sometimes because we're not always the most welcoming. We're not always the most welcoming sport to a beginner. Sometimes we're very intimidating.
Yes.
You know, people don't feel like they're good enough to play with other people, and we are relatively difficult to learn. We're not the easiest. That doesn't mean you can't learn. We've got plenty of products out there with compression balls, and I still stand by the fact that a really good coach who's good with beginners can teach a beginner adult or beginner child to get on the court and rally, serve, and score within a month. I mean, I believe that with every fiber of my being that we can do that because I've seen it happen and I've experienced it. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to always have great strokes. That doesn't always mean that they're going to go out and be ready to play at a 3.5 league. Right. But boy, a 2.5 beginner league where they can serve, score, and maintain them.
It's the most fun
It's the most fun they have, sure. Right. And you know, as we know with Love to Learn, it's a successful program. They graduate in 6 weeks and they start playing.
Yeah. And I think that's really a change, at least over the last 10 to 15 years. I know when I came into the organization, my experience was very similar to what you had said previously. It was, you know, everybody in the office knew how to play. You weren't good enough to play, so you weren't invited to play. It was like, oh, you need to go take lessons. And I was like, I have better things to do with my time than be out on the court with a pro taking lessons. It wasn't until I found actually cardio tennis. Right. And the idea that I could go on a court with a number of people and they were super friendly. They were like, here, we'll show you what to do. And if you missed a ball, it doesn't matter. And I thought, oh, there is something here, but there wasn't a beginner class at that time. So you either had to take a beginner lesson, or you weren't playing with people who were beginner. And I think now that's completely changed. You have facilities doing beginner classes. You can find them a little bit easier, and it really does make it a lot more welcoming.
I think so. And cardio tennis is a perfect example of a product that just nails it because you get on the court and the focus is not on winning points or losing points. It's on getting your heart rate up. It's on getting a lot of laughs. It's on just playing points and the social aspect and games. It's game-based. Yeah. And so that's why cardio tennis at most places or some format of exercise tennis, whether it's cardio tennis or live ball or whatever you want to call it and brand it at your facility, it checks all the boxes because it's social and it's exercise.
Yep.
Duh.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it's the big duh.
How can our volunteers, you know, you're a volunteer leader, how can our volunteers get engaged maybe in new and different ways to help us introduce players to the game differently? I know you've been running some experiments down in Wellington in this space. I'm super curious for your perspective on where do the volunteers fit into that, being more welcoming, bringing people in space?
Well, I think it's important that we realize it all starts at the local level. Everything starts locally. And while I'm as big a fan as the next person of a great digital platform and great ways to bring the sport to people, at the end of the day, it starts locally. It starts with that one person having a great experience on the tennis court, and it's usually with another person, whether it's a friend or a coach or someone. And I go back to the phrase, not everybody can do everything, but almost everyone can do something. Sometimes it's as simple as if you're an avid player, if you bring a friend, if you help bring a person who has always been asking about trying tennis, if you bring that friend out to the court and try to hit some tennis balls with them, if you ask your local coach or pro or program person at a tennis center, hey, you know, every Sunday I'm available to play tennis with any new beginner from, you know, pick a time. Right. If you have that network of people, and that is the core of a local volunteer, somebody that's willing to donate their time to help introduce tennis to a person who wants to learn and wants to be a part of it, because we all know it's a terrific game. And sometimes that first experience on the court is a make or break moment. Right. A lot of times they come out and they're a little bit intimidated to take a private lesson, but they'll come out with a friend and try. or they'll join a group lesson with a group of other people who might be in the same boat they are. So, yeah, I think it all starts at the local level, and I think local volunteers are really key if we are indeed going to grow tennis.
So, Chuck, I want to ask you about your new board. I had the opportunity to talk to some of your new board members, and when you think about your board as a whole, what really stands out to you about this new group coming in?
Well, a little perspective, I think we've always had terrific boards. I think the section has always had an incredibly good group of volunteers. The one thing that excites me about this board in particular is just how diverse they are and how they come at things from different angles. I mean, obviously we have a lady that's a former ATP Tour player, and she has a great background in digital marketing. We have another lady whose background is in fundraising and has great experience that. We have a facility manager at a public tennis center. We also have a relatively young head teaching pro. And we also have someone who comes from the world of insurance and has an incredible business background. So I think out of the new board members, I think we've got a lot of different perspectives and people that can look at things in a different way. And I think they're going to be a great complement to the current board members we have that are returning, who have great institutional knowledge of what the section's all about, and they have their own, skill set as well. So, we have a good mix of people. If I were going to equate it to a team, I would say that we have a great unit that can function as a team with different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. And what amazed me about the board that you've assembled is that they have such a high level of business acumen, but they also are all currently actively involved in Florida tennis, whether it's as a player or as a coach. I mean, they all have different roles and responsibilities within tennis. One's a director. You have such a great viewpoint of they touch everything that's happening in tennis in Florida. And that's an amazing assembly of minds in a room.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that's an incredible bandwidth. And if, just diversity of thought is pretty outstanding there with that group.
Well, Chuck, I just want to thank you for the time. It's been wonderful spending this time with you. We have a lot of fun outside of doing podcasts, right? I'm sure we'll do many more chats with Chuck in the future. But it's
as always.
Yes, as always, we have a great time. I know we'll do this more, and certainly just want to thank you for being on the podcast. For everyone who's listening to the podcast, we have a ton of information on our new board, and also we have a companion episode of the podcast with our new board members. So make sure that you check that out. Leave us a comment and question on our social media. We love getting questions and comments, and I'm sure Chuck would be happy to answer them as well. So for all episodes of the Here to Serve podcast, please visit USTAFlorida.com/here to serve.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Chuck.